Yeah. Well, welcome to our class this evening. Let's see, we need lesson 7. If you got it, please. And I need about slide 14. If you can do that, that'd be amazing. We had gotten, we're in 1 Samuel chapter 7, and we had gotten part of the way through it last week. If you need the lesson sheet, raise your hand and we'll get one to you. Anybody need the lesson sheet? Wow. Oh, Stan, you're the winner. You're the winner.
There's no problem.
And if you didn't notice, the picture on the back is also in the introductory sheet for 1 Samuel. Okay. See if we can get started and finish this this chapter. Sometimes we're down at verses 13 and 14 on page 5 of the handout, but sometimes this is referred to as the revival at Mizpah, where Samuel meets with the people of Israel and, convinces them to give up their idols and return back to the Lord and seek Him. And they do that, and so it's often referred to as the revival at Mizpah. But we got here, verse 13, we're ready for 14, but I want to talk about 13 first. Remember, up until this point, the Philistines have really given them trouble. And they captured the ark, and finally they turned the ark back over. And once the Israelites got it, it caused them problems because they didn't treat it right. And now everything is going the way it should be. They have turned back to God. And here's some good news. So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come anymore into the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. Now just stop and think about that. All the days of Samuel. From that point on, and there's going to be quite some time to elapse, the Israelites are protected from the Philistines. And that's very, very interesting. Now, this is only going to be temporary. It's several years, but it's still temporary. Because remember, when Saul becomes king, he has to fight the Philistines forever. Throughout his whole reign, the Philistines plague Israel. But during the time from here on, as long as Samuel's the judge, the Lord's hand is against the Philistines. And then we go to the next verse. Then the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel from Ekron to Gath. And Israel recovered its territory from the hands of the Philistines. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Now I'm going to go back up here. Here is Ekron, and here's Gath. And I realize this doesn't show the detail. We don't know the specific cities that came back into Israelite control. The text says is between Ekron and Gath. So evidently there were several towns down here, and they were Israelite cities, but the Philistines controlled them. Now they get their cities back. Again, that's big. That's huge for the Israelites to regain territory that the Philistines, because the Philistines, you see, they control this whole coastal area, and they have been making inroads into Israelite territory. So that's that's a big one for them to get the territory. And then there's peace between Israel and the Amorites. And the Amorites would be the native Canaanites. Now, you remember when Israel got the promised land, they were to destroy all the Canaanites. Every time the people of God don't do what God tells them to, it causes problems. Nothing's changed. It causes problems today. When we don't do what God wants us to do, it causes problems. Well, Israel, they didn't destroy all of them. And so there's been tension. Now there's peace between Israel and Ammon. We don't really know exactly what all that means. We just know that there's some amicability between the children of Israel and the native Canaanites, or what were referred to as the Amorites. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. All the days of his life. From that on out until Saul becomes king. We could make that assumption. He went from year to year on a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. Now, it says he judged Israel. But if we look at where he judged, Bethel, Gilgal, Mizpah, and then the next verse, I think it's the next verse, but he always returned to Ramah, for his home was there. There he judged Israel, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Now, what's interesting is when we talk about where he judged, it's all in basically the territory of Benjamin. Benjamin didn't have a big territory, if you remember. And that's where Samuel is judging. And he makes this circuit. And these three towns are very close together, Bethel, Mizpah, and Ramah. Gilgal is over here near the Jordan River, north of Jericho. But here's his circuit. What about all these people up here? Well, we're going to talk about this one in a minute. But when we talk about he judged Israel, it's like we're back in the period of Judges where everybody did what was right in their own sight. Evidently, that's what's happening in other parts of this territory of Palestine. But the territory that Samuel is judging is this small territory of Benjamin and a little bit into the territory of Ephraim. Now, it's centrally located, but again, the circuit that he travels kind of indicates it's a very limited territory. Now, that's going to change with the kingship, isn't it? It's going to change. But for right now, when we talk about him judging all of Israel, it seems to be a very small territory. Questions, comments before we go on to the next chapter? Okay. Let's see if I can get somebody to hand out 8. I gave Eric the evil eye, and he, no, thank you, Eric. First Samuel. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. So now we move on to chapter 8, and we'll just start with these first verses. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. And they were judges in Beersheba. Now, some of you may remember that Vayahi is that phrase that I love because it appears in all these narratives, and it just kind of leads you into the next step. And so it was. Next came this. And it came to pass when Samuel was old. Now, here is some interesting stuff I thought was very interesting stuff. It's been about 40 years since the revival at Mizpah, and now 4 decades have passed. I mean, from chapter 7 to chapter 8, now it came to pass, that's 4 decades, we think. Now, how do they come to this point? Well, last week we talked about the birth of Samuel was probably 1120 BC. And the revival at Mizpah about 1085 BC. So he was about 35 when the revival started. If you go up and you look when they believe he became king, and you back it up a little bit for some time to evolve from the start of chapter 8 when they request a king, they figure by this time Samuel's about 75. 35 when the revival at Mizpah started, 4 decades later, 75. Yeah, we may be off, they may be off by 3 to 5 years, but still, that's a long time that elapsed. That was a long time that the Lord's hand was against the Philistines. And that's kind of interesting. We don't, when we read these things, we usually don't think in all those times. And that's why I was excited about this, because now this starts to make some sense that Samuel's old. He's about my age. He's old. And the people are starting to think, oh, Samuel, you're old. Well, for some reason, and maybe Samuel was thinking about it, he said, I'm going to appoint my 2 sons as judges. And he had 2 boys. We never read about him getting married. Must have been in that 4 decades. We don't read about him having children until we get to this point. And the names he gave them, Yahweh is God, El is God, and then Abijah, God is my father, or something like that. Here is Yahweh, and I is father, so Yahweh is my father, or my father is Yahweh. 2 very righteous names that he gave to his sons. And yet they're not very righteous, are they? Now, I don't think they're bad as Eli's sons. I don't think they're that immoral, but they're certainly not moral enough to be judges, as we read. But his sons did not walk, did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Now, there's a couple of words that we're going to see over and over in this chapter and in this story. One of those is the word took, lakach. And it's not just, it doesn't mean, well, he just took something. Sometimes it can be forcibly taking something against our will. If you come and steal my car, you took my car, but it's by force. It was malicious. I don't like you taking my car, okay? So we're going to see this word took used several times in this sense in chapter 8. And the other word we're going to see is mishpat. Mishpat. Here, justice. Psalm 119, longest chapter, longest psalm, goes through the entire Hebrew alphabet, 22 letters, 8 verses each letter. Mishpat is mentioned several times. There are some words used in Psalm 119, ordinances, law, judgments. I can't even think of the different word, but they're almost synonymous. It's the instructions that God has laid out for man in his word. And so one of those words that appears is mishpat, and it's either judgments or ordinances that it represents in Psalm 119. I say all of that because mishpat is going to be used in a lot of different ways. It's going to be used in a very different way in chapter 8. Justice, they perverted justice. Mishpat, good word. But we're going to see it take on a totally different meaning in chapter 8. So I just wanted to mention that one. Now, Beersheba. Remember, up here is where, in the tribe of Benjamin, is where Samuel's circuit was. Beersheba is 50 miles to the south. It's way off from his normal circuit. And he makes his two boys judges there. Why? We don't know, but it raises a lot of questions. Why in the world did you send your two boys down here? Normally, you don't have two judges in a location. But he made both of his boys judges, and they're judges, bad judges, down here in Beersheba. I don't know. I don't know why he did it. Maybe he thought, you know, I'm going to be gone pretty soon. I'm getting pretty old. I need to have somebody to follow me, so I'll appoint my sons judges. He could have been thinking that. Or it could be that things had gotten busier and busier, and maybe more people were turning back to the Lord, and he needed some help judging people down in the south of Israel. Again, that's just speculation. We don't know. But he points his two sons as judges, and they are not good boys. They are not doing what they ought to be doing. They did not walk in the ways of their father. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. So if the people have some request to make of the judge, Samuel, they would come to his territory. It wasn't like, Samuel, I need to have a meeting. I'll come meet y'all at Mizpah or Gilgal or wherever. The elders of Israel want to meet with Samuel. So they come to Ramah, Samuel's home, and said to him, look, you are old. Now, well, I'll come back. You're old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. They do not walk in your ways. Again, to the Jewish mind, there was a way of walking. It was a way of living. Paul talks about to walk worthy. Paul had that Jewish mindset of the Christian walk being like walking the way the law directs you. And these elders notice, your boys don't walk in your ways. Now, let's see. Zakein is a word for elders, and it's based upon age, really. It's about age. And so when they refer to Samuel being old, he is Zakein as a verb, but you're old. That's kind of interesting to me. But they want a king, and the word for king is melech. And I guess if there's a noun that appears so often in the Old Testament, it's melech, because that's a king. And we're going to go through this period of some 4 centuries of kings of Israel, the melech. So what do we get from all this? Why do they want a king? Well, first, Sammy, you're getting old. You're getting old. We need a replacement. It can't be your boys because they are scoundrels. They don't walk in your way, so it can't be them. But the one that ought to strike us the most, we want to be like everybody else. We want to be like everybody else. Every nation around us, they could have said, all these pagan, idolatrous nations around us, they have a king. We want to be like them. We want to have a king. That's basically what they're saying. We want to be like everybody around us and have a king. Now, you may remember back in the book of Deuteronomy that the Lord put it into the law, basically that one day Israel would want a king. And here's what they're going to do to you. And the king shouldn't do this. And when we get a little farther in this chapter, when the Lord has Samuel tell the people what a king will do, he doesn't use the same things that are found in Deuteronomy. It's kind of an interesting thing. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. Now, I believe if I was Samuel, I'd have been offended too. He has led Israel for 40-something years. The Philistines hadn't bothered them. They've had a good time, really. They have had a peaceful time under the judgeship of Samuel. And they said, Samuel, you're getting old. We want a king. We want a king to judge us. And so it displeased Samuel, but Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord, this is the first time, he's going to do it 3 times. First time, he says to Samuel, heed or listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And the words to look at are melech, and then the word for to act like a king, the verb is malach. So you have basically the same letters, just one's a verb and one's a noun. But it's always struck me what the Lord said. They hadn't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. They have rejected the sovereignty of God. Now, you and I have read, hopefully, the Old Testament up to this point. And we know the history of Israel, how God delivered them, and they turned to idols. God took judges and delivered them, and then they would go back into sinfulness. God would raise up another judge and deliver them. They just kept going through this cycle. And now, they've had this revival. Everything's been good, but they want to be like everybody else, and they have rejected the Lord. What a sad story. It's really a sad story. Because you and I can sit here and we read it, and we know what's going to happen. And we want to scream out, Israelites, what's the matter with you folks? Why are you doing this? But listen, folks, it gets worse. It gets worse. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, Samuel, that's what they're doing to you. You've been a good judge. You've kept them out of trouble. They've had peace. You've done all the things that I asked you to do to lead the people. And now they're doing the same thing to you. They have forsaken me and served other gods. Sad. Now, therefore, for the second time, heed or listen to their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior. There's that word, mishpat, which meant justice or judgment. Now it can also mean manner or ways or behavior, and show them the ways of the king who will reign over them. So the Lord says, Samuel, you do what they want. You're going to give them a king. But before you do it, you got to forewarn them. You got to tell them what's going to happen. When they ask for a king, I want you to tell them and maybe it's the injustice of the king who will reign over you. Tell them how the king is going to act towards you. So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people. Now remember, Samuel's a prophet. As a prophet, he is God's messenger. And so he relays the words that the Lord has given to him for the people who ask for a king. And here's the message. This will be the behavior, the mishpat, of the king who will reign over you. He will, remember what we said about taking? He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots. Now that doesn't necessarily mean in the military. Because see, some are going to be horsemen and some will run before his chariots. You remember when Absalom is going to come back and he goes down to Hebron? And what did he do? He got chariots and runners to run before him. And it's like, let's just say they have a king. Here comes the king. Here comes the king. To announce his arrival, to get people's attention. I guess they didn't have megaphones and all that, but they were trying to announce that here comes the king and you need to bow down and all of that. So he's going to take your sons and put them to work. He's going to appoint captains. And I just found this interesting. The word is sar. Remember Sarai, Sarah, princess? Well, this word is prince, same word meaning prince. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s, and will set some, and again, I didn't show it in the Hebrew, but because I'd had to put too many words in there, but hold on. I put it in the notes. Plow his plowing and harvest his harvest. When Hebrew does things like that, I think it's cool. So they're going to plow his plowing and harvest his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. Now, there it doesn't say he took them, but now he will take your daughters. You're going to take your daughters, and they're going to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. That's not all. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. So not only is he going to conscript their children to serve him, he's going to take their property, their crops, and give it to his servants. Just take it away from them. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officers and servants. Now just think of all that the king's taken from them already. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your sheep, 1/10 of your grain, 1/10 of your sheep, and you will be his servants.
And how dumb are they to say, give us a king?
When you read this and then you get to that point, he's taking their stuff to take care of his servants. Pretty soon you realize everything they do is just serving the king. No way to get ahead. They're his servants. And that's what the Lord's trying to tell them. If you ask for a king, here's what's going to happen. You're going to become his servants. Everything you own, everything you have, you are going to be given to serve the king. You're going to be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day. The word here is not Shema. Now, the King James and New King James translates this as hear, but most of the newer translations say answer. Anah is the Hebrew word. And the point of all this, if we get nothing else out of this lesson, the Lord says, I've warned you. If you ask for a king, you've rejected my sovereignty. He's going to make you servants. He's going to tax you to death. And when you cry out for help, yeah, the Lord's going to hear, but he's not going to answer. Now let that sink in. The Lord says, look, when you cry out for help, I've always delivered you. This time when you cried, I am not going to do a thing for you. You're on your own. I don't know about you, but that's a scary, scary thought. And that's where we're going to end tonight. And we'll finish this chapter next week. Thank you for being here.